So, ladies and gentlemen, the movie Night of the Living Dead created a whole bunch of fans of what they call zombie horror or body horror, but this movie didn't set the same trend, even though it was technically called The Night of the Crawling Terror. So today we're going to be talking about the cult movie that Rick Baker and some other great special effects people worked on, Squirm. Yeah, that's the title. Squirm is a 1976 American natural horror film written and directed by Jeff Lieberman, starring Don Scardino, Patricia Percy, R.A. Dow, Gene Sullivan, Peter McLean, Fran Higgins, and William Newman. The film takes place in the fictional town of Fly Creek, Georgia, which becomes infested with carnivorous worms after an electrical storm. Lieberman's script is based on a childhood incident when his brother fed electricity into a patch of earth, causing earthworms to rise to the surface. Now, most of the financing of the movie came from Broadway producers Edgar Lansbury and Joseph Burrer. Millions of worms were used over the 5-week filming in Port Wentworth, Georgia. Worms were brought in from as far as Maine to augment local supplies. Makeup artist Rick Baker provided the special effects, using prosthetics for the first time in his career. After American International Pictures picked up Squirm for distribution, it was edited to remove the most graphic scenes in an unsuccessful attempt to lower its R rating to PG. The film was a commercial success, but opened to lukewarm reviews, and has since become a critical favorite and a cult classic. Now, cinematography, Joseph Manguin, music by Robert Prince, production company was the Squirm Company, 93 minutes, and of course in English. Now, in this movie, in the rural town of Fly Creek, Georgia, a powerful storm blows down an overhead power line, leaving the region without electricity. The power line lands in wet mud and electrifies the worms underneath. The next morning, Jerry Sanders borrows a truck from her neighbor, worm farmer Roger Grimes, to pick up her boyfriend Mick, who is arriving from New York for a vacation. While Jerry and Mick go to town, Roger's shipment of 100,000 bloodworms and sandworms escape from the back of the truck. Mick enters a diner where a customer says over 300,000 volts are being released into the ground from severed power lines. He orders an egg cream and finds a worm in it, though the owner and Sheriff Jim Rustin believed he placed it there himself as a prank. Now, when Jerry introduces Mick to her mother Naomi and sister Alma, before they both leave to browse an antique dealer Aaron Beardsley house, outside, Roger's father Willie finds a shipment of worms is missing. Roger sees Mick with Jerry and becomes envious of their relationship. After arriving at Beardsley's house, Jerry and Mick cannot find him, but Jerry sees a human skeleton outside the property. They bring over Sheriff Rustin, but the skeleton, get this, disappears. Thinking it was another prank, Rustin threatens to arrest Mick if he returns to the town. While asking locals about Beardsley's whereabouts, they find out he was last seen before the storm. Mick believes he himself unintentionally released the worms. He apologizes to Roger and invites him to go fishing with him and Jerry. They find a skeleton in Roger's truck. Now, while on the boat, Mick is bitten by a worm. Roger shows his bitten off thumb and tells Mick and Jerry that worms attack when electrified. Mick gets off the boat to tend to his wound, leaving Jerry with Roger. Mick and Alma take the skeleton skull to an abandoned dental office, where they compare its teeth with x-rays and confirm the skeleton is Beardsley's. Roger makes advances toward Jerry, but the worms they brought as bait attack him and crawl into his face. He runs off in the woods, and Jerry tells Mick what happened. Mick and Jerry visit the worm farm to find Roger, but Mick finds Willie's body being eaten by worms. They try telling Sheriff Rustin, but he ignores them. Mick deduces the worms killed Beardsley, but cannot figure out why they attacked him. Now, while Mick and Jerry are eating dinner with Naomi and Alma, the worms eat through the roots of a tree, causing it to crash into the house. Mick realizes electricity is still being released from the power lines, and that the wet soil is acting as a conductor. He hypnotizes the worms, only come out at night. Hypothesizes, sorry about that. Mick tells Jerry to keep everyone inside equipped with candles, and leaves to get plywood to board up the house. Roger, whose face has been deformed by worms, attacks Mick and knocks him unconscious. He then enters the house and kidnaps Jerry. The worms infest the house and attack other places in town. Sheriff Rustin and a woman are eaten alive in a jail cell, and people at a bar are attacked and eaten. So how this works out basically is like you don't believe the worms are dangerous, and that's why they let their guard down. That was the spin of it. Now, when Mick regains consciousness and finds Naomi's remains covered in worms at the house, he decides to go upstairs. But Roger attacks him and chases him downstairs. Mick pushes Roger into a pile of worms, which engulf him, literally engulf him. Mick frees Jerry and tells her that Naomi and presumably Alma are dead. While they try escaping through a window, Roger crawls out of the pile of worms and bites Mick in the leg. Mick beats Roger to death with a flashlight before climbing onto a tree with Jerry, where they stay until morning. Upon waking up, they realize the worms had disappeared and a repairman informs them that the power has been restored. Alma, who survived by hiding in a chest, comes out and looks out the window. Jerry and Mick rush in the house to meet her. Now, this set up for a sequel, but like I said, it was just so beyond the beyond. Now, when Squirm was written by Jeff Lieberman, he was working for Janus Films on a series called The Art of Film. He developed Squirm after his work shifts ended to deal with his frustrations over having to put on a tie. The script was based again on a childhood incident where his brother connected a transformer to the ground to force worms to emerge so he can use them for a fishing trip, which scared the shit out of Lieberman. He was also inspired by a news story from Floyd Knobs about migrating millipedes invading homes and the 1963 film The Birds. Now, Lieberman completed a rough draft in 6 weeks and gave it to producer George Manasseh, who saw potential in it. Manasseh showed Lieberman's script to then independent Broadway producers Edgar Lansbury and Joseph Barreau. They read the script during the warm U.S. summer months of '75, after which the project moved swiftly, with the producers buying Squirm and investing $470,000 of their own money into the project. There was no indication how much the worms cost, but they can be expensive. Now, Squirm was the only film produced by the Squirm Company. The original setting and filming location was planned to be New England, but the filming was changed to Port Wentworth, Georgia, due to unsuitable fall weather conditions in the northeastern U.S. Obviously, worms are not going to move when it's cold. Production began in the warmer climate of Georgia in the late fall of November '75. Now, a piece of trivia. Kim Basinger auditioned for the role of Jerry, but Lieberman passed on her, believing that the audience would not believe that she would live in the heck down. Lieberman later regretted the decision, calling himself an idiot. Martin Sheen was also originally cast to play the role of Mick, but was replaced by Don Scardino. Sheen had suggested that Mick should be an actor and wanted him to recite the York scene from Helmet when he discovers Aaron Beasley's skull. Jean Sullivan, who played Jerry's mother Naomi, based her southern accent on Tennessee Williams. Prepared for his part, as Roger, Ari Dow spent weeks in Port Wentworth to do method acting training. Now, half of the worms used in the film were made of rubber. The others include large sandworms from Maine, refrigerated and transported to Port Wentworth, and an estimated 3 million bloodworms provided by the University of Georgia Oceanographic Institute. To get the worms to move, wires were run under them and electrified. One scene in which a living room was filled with worms was accomplished by building a scaffolding 4 feet above the ground, and a canvas was placed on top and covered with a 6-inch layer of thousands of worms. The local Boy Scouts troop were hired to move the canvas from below to make the worms undulate, and they eventually received merit badges for their work. After production wrapped, newspapers in Maine reported the local fishing industry had been impacted by a shortage of worms caused by the film production. Now, Brian Smedley Aston edited Squirm. Robert Prince composed the score and also conducted a full orchestra in England for the film. Bernard Herrmann, composer of The Day the Earth Stood Still and Psycho, was originally slated to write the score but died before beginning work. Joe Mangin was the director of photography, and Henry Sharady was the art director. Special makeup effects by the great Rick Baker created the makeup in New York for Ari Dow's character Roger, who turns into who was later called Wormface. He made a facial mold using prosthetics, which he had never worked with before. The fake worms were drawn through Dow's skin using monofilament fishing line covered in lubricant pulled from just out of shot. Now, principal photography, get this, wrapped in 5 weeks, one of which was dedicated to working with the worms. Lieberman was heavily involved with the post-production work, which included making the sound effects for the worms using balloons and shears and looping the two sounds using multi-track recording. The shears snapping, opening, and close were used to make the sound of their teeth. The worm screams were taken from a scene in which pigs are slaughtered in Brian De Palma's '76 film Carrie. Now, when Squirm was shown at the Cannes Film Market in May '76, it was acquired by AIP, American International, who released it theatrically in the United States on July 14, '76, and worldwide on August 9 that same year. AIP had given a $250,000 advance to the film's producers for domestic distribution and $500,000 in guarantees from 16 territories. Now, AIP hoped for a PG rating from the MPAA, but he objected to nearly all the horror scenes as objectionable to PG-rated sensibilities. The film was eventually edited to remove most of the scariest material and a shower scene with Patricia Percy. This cut the running time by 1 minute. The now 92-minute film, however, still received an R rating. In 1977, the MPAA re-rated the film with a PG designation. The TV film was even more extensively cut. Lieberman commented that in the theatrical version there was just enough of the worm attacks left for them to work. On TV, the cuts are ridiculous. The film was financially successful as Lansbury's and Bureau made their investment back from the foreign theatrical market. Now, released on Vestron Video on VHS in 1983, it was also released on DVD by MGM in 2003. The DVD version, with a 93-minute runtime, restored the shower scene and included an audio commentary with Lieberman as part of special features. MGM released it as a part of a set with Swamp Thing and Return of the Living Dead in 2011. The unedited R-rated version was released in the UK on Blu-ray and DVD by Arrow on September 23, 2013. This version was released in the United States by Shout Factory on Blu-ray under his label Scream on October 28, 2014. It was also released on streaming services including Amazon Prime Video, Tubi, and Shudder. Now, opinions on the film's horror elements and special effects were mostly positive, with several reviewers crediting the special effects for conveying a sense of gruesome creepiness. Now, critics were less impressed with the film's production and performances and were divided on Lieberman's direction. Kevin Thomas of the LA Times argued that Lieberman showed plenty of panache and definitely playing a disarmingly folksy atmosphere against rapidly escalating peril. Now, Squirm also received lukewarm reviews upon its release from Variety and New York Times, but impressions have changed over time. Counts, an early reviewer, criticized the way the film cut away from violent moments to scenes of comic relief, saying that it undermined the film's threadbare tension. But Thomas thought the film had a good balance between humor and terror. Now, a TV Guide contributor gave positive marks to a handling of the tongue-in-cheek humor and scares, including the tribute to Psycho, the shower scene. Craig considered it to be entertaining and fairly insightful film, which certainly not uncritical to its main characters in the community. Now, Squirm, for some critics, can be seen as a revenge of a nature film, a genre which began in the early 70s with films like Crow Frogs and Night of the Lepus. Jaws, the most important film in the genre, spawned Jawsploitation films which attempted to take advantage of its success, but film study scholar I.Q. Hunter argues that Jaws merely served to perpetuate the early 1970s genre Quentin Tarantino called the Mother Nature Goes Apeshit kind of movie. Now, director Brian De Palma was a big fan of the movie. He included a poster of Squirm in several scenes of his 1981 film Blowout. A fan of De Palma, Lieberman told Fangoria that he asked him about the poster years later. De Palma reportedly answered, "Only use the best." Now, musician Weird Paul Petrowski created an album titled Worm in My Egg Cream that was dedicated to a scene where Mick orders an egg cream and finds a worm in it. Released on his label Rocks and Rolling Records, all 16 tracks of the album are titled the same as the album. Squirm was also featured on a 10th season episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000, a comedy television series in which the character Mike Nelson and his two robot friends, Crow T. Robot and Tom Servo, are forced to watch bad films as part of an ongoing scientific experiment. The episode was broadcast on the Sci-Fi Channel on August 1st, 1999, and was the penultimate episode of the season and of the Sci-Fi Channel era of the show. It was shown along with the short film A Case of Spring Fever. In 2014, Shout Factory released the MST3K episode as part of the Turkey Day collection, along with episodes focused on Jungle Goddess, The Painting Hills, and The Screaming Skull. Now, ladies and gentlemen, take a look at it in Tubi. I haven't seen it in a number of years. But I know one thing, though, where bloodworms are involved, they even get this movie. But I think, like I said, the nature horror genre, you're seeing a lot of these type movies. But for what it is, it was a very dedicated attempt to give a new meaning to nature horror. And having Rick Baker in it, the future Oscar winner, is a highlight. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's our latest in our 1970s, what they call cult classic movies. If you like what we're doing here, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share, or super chat. And don't forget, requests are always accepted and always highly considered. Thanks for listening. Bye.